So we have definitely discovered, again, as part of the governance and the risk, that the human in the loop for us is really, really important. So, we are always looking for our individuals, our experts, to do the final interpretation.
Okay, hello and welcome. I'm Chris Scott, the founder of Emap. Today, I am very happy to be joined by my friend Tony Skeggs. Tony.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me, first of all. So, look, I am currently Chief Digital and Technology Officer at a company called Cornwall Insight. My background has largely been in media for more years now than I'd probably like to mention, but involving people from large media organisations like Sky and Yahoo, Emap and Bauer. Probably more in the last 15 years or so, been more B2B information businesses that have been private equity backed, but it's always been at a sort of senior marketing and digital level.
And so today you're at Cornwall Insight, which, as you said, is a B2B data company.
It
Can you
is.
tell us a little bit about what it does?
Yes. So, look, Cornwall Insight traditionally, I guess, are a energy consulting business that, like most consultancy businesses, once you've solved the same problem a number of times, it becomes relatively obvious that you potentially should put a product into the marketplace. So have developed a range of products for the energy market as well. Those are on subscription basis. So they have a consultancy side of their business, a subscription information side of their business. They also have a training side of their business as well. They're the three main revenue lines. They are, like most information businesses or consultancies, fairly niche in what they cover. So their depth is really quite deep. They have a number of experts in their fields across energy. A lot of people in Cornwall Insight will describe themselves as energy geeks. The guys love the work that they do. They know their domain very well, and their opinion and our understanding of the marketplace, is what essentially is one of our USPs and our products. Feeds into one of the reasons that, people refer to us, our information and our consultancy, in order to get that independent third-party opinion on exactly what's going on in the market.
Right, so you're selling depth of knowledge.
We are.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for anybody listening in who just trying to get a grip on what that looks like, it's kind of similar to a magazine.
That's interesting. So, look, I guess, yes, look, you can consider someone like Cornwall, it's consultancy apart, it's a traditional consultancy side of the business, but it's information business, I guess, to a lot of people looks a bit like what's been sort of traditional trade press, right? And media. Right. Something that you get on a regular basis so you understand exactly what's going on. So they've got a range of products, and one of their products in particular will do that. It will give you some insight and information updated on a daily basis, newsletter-esque, as to what's happening in the marketplace, why it's happening and why it's important, why you should care about it. It has also then developed a number of other quite significant data models over a period of time, which will give you insight over the last 25 years of what the energy markets do in coal and gas in particular, and forward-looking views of what's affecting those markets, the dynamics of that marketplace through the whole supply chain, and models that you can reflect on as to what's happening over the next 25 years. So it's been a large mix of sort of insight, information, and data modelling, which goes into its information business, which is a subscription business right now.
Okay, so you have maybe the widest part of the business looks a bit like a B2B magazine. Then you have data, prediction and models for people who want to go deeper. And then you have bespoke consulting for those that need to get specific answers to really important high-value questions. That's
right. And then training as well, which is if you've been in the market for 3 or 5 years, then, there are probably elements that, it's quite deep, it's quite complex at some point. So certainly that plays its part too.
Okay. And unlike the kind of magazines that some people listening might be familiar with, this is not a £3.50 in the newsagent.
You wouldn't expect to pick it up off a newsagent shelf. It's a sort of information that, goes into people making decisions about the work that they do. And those decisions have, two sides really, both quite big implications of investment and potentially quite big implications on risk Yeah. So when you're making those decisions, although lots of people in the marketplace will know their markets quite well and understand what's going on, to have a third-party independent view to either qualify your thoughts or, in fact, challenge those thoughts are very useful things, obviously, to have. That does come at a cost. Hopefully, it's a cost that people find there's good value in, but certainly we're talking about, thousands of pounds when you're thinking about our products as opposed to sort of a few hundred.
Very high value, premium product. Yes. We really need that depth of knowledge.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure that's going to come back into the conversation later as we start talking about AI,
Indeed.
which I would probably characterize a little bit differently from that. Great. You have, as you said before, led technology transformations at a bunch of companies over a couple of decades now. So you've always been at the forefront of the latest technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously there's a lot of change coming about again now. And my question to you is, does this feel familiar to you? Like, is this just another new technology, or is AI fundamentally transforming the world we live in?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I guess I've actually had a chance to reflect on that. I came into Cornwall Insight. I've probably been here for about 8 months or so now. Did a little bit of consultancy beforehand, and essentially the job that needed doing in terms of their transformation didn't feel completely different from things that I've done in the past. However, what's becoming more and more evident as we experiment and pilot with AI is quite the pace and the type of tools and how you can adapt those tools to do some of the jobs that need to be done, which changes suddenly the way that you can think about your technology implementation, the technology stack that you use, and also brings into question a little bit about what has been for the last 15, 20 years, that sort of buy versus build challenge, how many SaaS models you might have in your stack to get the pace and quality that you're looking for, particularly in a business like Cornwall Insight, which is private equity backed. The pace and quality is always something which is high on discussion from a technology point of view. And there are clear advantages, I think, coming to the fore from an AI perspective, with all of those things coming into a much sharper questioning right now as to how you can progress and move forward. So it's similar in many ways, but with a whole different set of technology tools in order to do the job this time.
Okay. Maybe we'll loop back to some of that, but I think that's a good segue into, so what is Cornwall Insight's position on AI in general? How do you think about it?
Yeah.
I guess these are principles that you've brought to the business largely.
Yeah, I would say so. Although, look, most of the time, the way I work from a technology point of view with a business in terms of transformation is always to get business buy-in. So very often I partner with my exec colleagues who are running the different functions of our business. So I think most technology change that I've experienced, maybe that's similar for everybody, the way that you make it stick and make it last and make it feel like there's benefit to people is to have that change being managed by the business people themselves, and that change being felt, that they're receiving benefit from it. So internally, we very much see AI strategically as quite important for us. It's also quite a big risk. So there's opportunity and risk in equal abundance in, the business that we're in. So not to be ignored. At the same stage, I think we also recognize that, there's different people at different points of the maturity curve. Some people are using it more than others. So managing the pace and introducing the types of things that you want and having all of the types of things taken on board and progressed at a good quality and a good pace in a structured way is one of the challenges of any technology. And it's a massive challenge of AI because it's so readily available for everybody and there is so much capability built into it. So we see it strategically, but we also see that there's got to be a good amount of governance and control around how we take that forward as well.
Interesting. So you said that some people use it more than others. The thing that jumped to my mind then was performance reviews, right? So historically, you go back a couple of years, you'd probably have maybe an annual performance review cycle, something like that. And you're going to be looking at a bunch of things, but high on the list is the output that somebody has produced. So now, maybe in this transition phase, you have some staff who are heavily leaning into using it. Maybe some who are aware and use it a bit, and some that are very reluctant and don't at all.
Yeah.
Like, is that actually coming out in their output, in how you think about people and how successful they are in their careers?
Well, that's interesting. So I wouldn't say we're at a stage yet we can judge that output. But what I can say is that's part of the consideration. So our head of people and talent is very... Well, as an exec, there is this conversation going on continually about AI, our usage of it. We've also structured it at Cornwall Insight. So we've actually got what we describe as an internal AI network, which are representatives from each of our functions across the business who are coming together as champions to represent actually what AI is going to be able to do for their function. So within that, then we have a regular report that goes back into our SLG, our senior exec leadership team. And from a HR perspective, where he's already starting to think about actually how do we now need to think about all of from our hiring right through to how we are judging the quality and the output of our teams and staff and how are they adopting it. So it's already been started to think about how we adopt that from a people point of view within our business. So yeah, while we've got as far as be able to provide, I think, absolute output check, because we're still very much an experimental pilot type of stage, it's very much in our thoughts.
So from the top down, it really is touching all parts of Cornwall Insight's business. Yeah,
absolutely it is. And I'll say that, again, it goes back to, I guess, a philosophy in terms of change, which is people need to own this and sitting at their desks and feeling a bit empowered. So we're doing this, I think, in a way which gives access to people to some tools. Those tools are being managed centrally via my IT function. We will roll those out in the same way that we do lots of IT stuff. And we then make sure that, stuff like our information not feeding the public brain or going back into that LLM publicly is all from a security point of view and a data governance point of view is in the right place. We've also put together an AI policy, which is part of our HR function, and everyone needs to address that policy, look at that, sign up to it, so you're on their record so they understand what tools are in play they could be using, how they should be using it, and the right way to think about it when they go about that. And at the same stage, with the AI network, what we're actually doing is we're very focused on the use cases. So rather than just using the tools we've got in play at the moment for the tools' sake, where we want to encourage experimentation, we're also trying to frame that in terms of what use case are you really trying to solve, what's it doing for you. And the things that are probably coming across easily and quickest right now are things like meeting summaries. So we're a Microsoft sort of back end. So we have our Microsoft domain, which includes Teams. So we've opened up Copilot and the premium version of that, so people can record their meetings, and the transcription of that can be shared and can be saved, and it gives us some quick way for people to refer to meeting notes and actions. That stuff's getting better all the time, clearly. At the same stage, we're collecting more and more information internally from a business information perspective that actually we're starting to pull together, which is allowing us to start to pick up on any consistent conversations and themes and things that might be happening in all sorts of areas of the business.
Okay. So maybe then there's a good opportunity to get into, you said you have policies for this, it's already documented. What are the whole spectrum of tools that are in play at Cornwall Insight today?
So we've got licenses for Copilot right now, for ChatGPT, for Claude, and we've just added desktop and coworker features into that as well, which have probably had, I would say, in a very short time, one of the biggest impacts so far. And we've also got a little bit of Gemini stuff going on as well. So a little bit of experimentation based on use cases that the AI champions are running themselves. We get together as a group on a frequent basis, review each other's use cases. I'll go back to the point I made about governance. The actual owner of this AI group, I'm the enabler from an IT perspective. The owner is actually our director of strategy and product.
Okay.
So from a business perspective, Ben's the one who's helping manage what that backlog is. And between us as a group, we are prioritizing the use cases and seeing how many of those then will apply across our different functions, providing some weighting of that. And then we are asking the champions to prove those use cases, understand where some of that value is. And as we scale those use cases and look to roll out more licenses, have a clear understanding of where that value is really coming from. So there's a balance between how quickly and giving some autonomy and stuff moving forward, as well as having a really good view on some of the governance structure, the security, and some of the cost implications that we're picking up from these things as well.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like very value driven, which is great. You really focus on use cases, trying to measure successfully against them. What about assessing the risk? I mean, you just mentioned cost. I guess that's one of them. Yeah. How do you see that?
Well, look, from a cost perspective, what's Claude Coworker has been one, I think, which has probably been the most acute examples that we've had. But as Coworker is running more and more complex queries across a couple of the different workflows, it's obviously using more credits, and people are finding they're coming to the end of their credit sessions quite quickly. So with the use cases we find value in, we are quickly giving them more credits, being that there, a bit of flex and supporting that. But what becomes quite clear is that those costs could build very quickly. They're linked very much as well to how people actually provide background to get to the results and answers they want from an LLM perspective. And given the different levels of understanding of LLMs, how they work and how you go through that process, there's probably some level here as well, I think, of individuals' ability to think creatively and critically.
Yeah.
That point of view, that approach really helps when you start to think about how you interact with an LLM. So there is quite a lot of difference, I think, emerging for me, even some of the few use cases that we're running right now. So I'd imagine the costs could spiral fairly quickly without much governance and control in place. Conscious of that.
Right. So a little bit later, we're going to get on to where we're at in the technology maturity life cycle. So I don't want to go too deep on that now.
Okay.
But what you just said, it really feels like we're at a stage of immaturity with AI where you need to make people aware of, for example, how to prompt to reduce the cost. That can't be the long-term state of how these foundation models want to work with their customers. But today, there's a project, I don't know if you've come across it, called Caveman. It's a skill for Claude. And it basically tells Claude to respond in the way that Caveman might talk.
Interesting.
Because they charge based upon the number of tokens that come back out of Claude. That's the charging model. So if you can encourage Claude to answer in one-word sentences, grants, you pay, actually in some cases, a fifth of the amount that you would for its kind of verbose thing, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting, but it's also just weird and bizarre.
Yeah.
Like, this doesn't feel like the final form of this.
No.
And if you have to tell your employees, encourage your AI assistants to reply to you tersely so that we're charged.
Yeah, indeed.
That's weird work.
It is a weird place to get to, isn't it? I agree. So I think that a couple of things, I think, from that perspective, in terms of cost at least, and there are other things obviously in risk and governance as well, but in terms of cost, I think that the way I see us operating is as we discover the real value of the use cases, and they're growing quite quickly, the ones that we feel are going to offer the most value from an enterprise perspective, and potentially they might be more company-wide, they might just be more directly involved in a particular function, but clearly we can see the value in doing that. We will look to apply at a more enterprise level. So we'll have essentially more consistent, background prompts and execution of those at an architecture level, as opposed to a individual end user level. So it means that responsibility is then taken away from that end user. I don't really have to think maybe quite as hard in order to get the output that we want. So we can govern and control that a little bit more, essentially, with only the right people having access to the prompts and the model in order that they can change it appropriately as we go along, rather than everyone trying to answer the same query themselves.
Right. So again, that's another side to the governance thing that you brought up a few times. Have you seen anything going wrong with these kind of governance scenarios, maybe other than running up a high fraud bill?
I think with areas like ours, what becomes quite important is the context and nuance and the quality of information that comes out. And when you have a domain like ours, you could potentially be using similar words, phrases, but there are two sides of the coin, those, compared to where you sit in the marketplace. Therefore, context and interpretation of our domain, our language in that domain, becomes really quite important. So one of the things that becomes obvious is when we've done some, the experiment stuff we've got, where we lose some of that context and you leave an LLM to fill in the gaps, it becomes quite obvious that it's not quite right. And in a business like ours, where we are relied on and trusted for that level of quality and interpretation of the market, it needs to be right. So we have definitely discovered, again, as part of the governance and the risk, that the human in the loop for us is really, really important. So, we are always looking for our individuals, our experts, to do the final interpretation and to, provide that insight and that layer, which our, individuals can give. What we're really looking for is AI to be the tool that helps get us to that point as quickly as possible and everyone on the same level of understanding, where then we can add in the real nuance that goes along with stuff we report on.
So look, that makes complete sense. It seems that as a leadership team, you're really keen to make sure that the right gates are there, there's human in the loop where appropriate. I would be surprised if there weren't employees of Cornwall Insight who use AI for work, but haven't gone through these systems.
Yeah, me too. I think it'd be naive to think that isn't happening, even though clearly the policy's in place and that would be against the policy. But let's face it, there's a balance as well about, how much you want to, be draconian, sorry about that, and how much you allow it all to all happen. So, within the policy, it's clear that, where you are using it a lens, potentially for personal use, don't use, information which is IP owned by Cornwall Insight. Right. And there are, I think, plenty of ways that you can still get value and get an idea and have a conversation potentially, even if you have your own personal license, without actually too much risk to the business. So there's a balance there. But that said, more and more people are coming forward, and there's more and more requests going on internally for the types of licenses. So we're judging those by each use case and making sure that we're providing the licenses where we can see there's value.
And so we touched upon two big risks. I want to see if there are others that you would add into that. And these definitely apply to using third-party tools that haven't been vetted, but apply probably just as much to the main foundational models, which is, first of all, that data leakage. Yeah. So data which is IP of Cornwall Insight getting into a public model. Yeah. I'm curious how worried you are about that, if it's a real thing, if there's any evidence of it. And then secondly, I guess it's a compliance thing. So how do you make sure when, as part of the GDPR, you have to declare all of your sub-processes, right? Isn't AI using a tool that has not been vetted and sending data somewhere which actually makes a third party that you didn't know about technically a sub-process? Right? Is there that kind of thing going on?
Interesting. So I think in terms of sort of other risks and dangers, so there's certainly a risk to a couple of our products in terms of the way that part of our product offering, as we touched on before, is about using insight and general stuff that's going on. It's easy to someone to think they could go to a chat GTP and sit at their desk and just ask that the same question, and it gives you information back, which looks on the surface like it probably is doing something similar to maybe what our products have done. Right. So there's a real challenge, I think, from that point of view, which becomes part of that risk from a business perspective. So something that we are aware of and working on, and probably only drives us harder to understand actually how we add deeper level of value within those products that we currently do. And that's probably moving us from a mindset, which is we can just provide you information and insight, to actually we're going to be much clearer about what this information and insight really means to you, what's really changing, how that's affecting the marketplace, and really why that's important to you. Right. Now, from that perspective, we're describing those sort of things internally as signals, one of the signals in the noise. And actually, when we look at our own content and the stuff that we turn out, we start to recognize that AI is getting better and better at interpreting, understanding, and then giving us, pointing us to those signals. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that's certainly helping mitigate some of the risk is the whole technology stack. So partly one of the things that I've introduced as well is the data graph. So within our tech stack, our AI is referring and looking at our data graph model, which we have developed a full ontology for, and which then provides a complete understanding and context, and something that we continue to work on when we recognize, for example, that answers aren't maybe quite as qualified or specific as when an analyst looks at it, they'd expect it to be. So our data graph model is an important part of allowing our consistent quality information to be produced out of our LLMs.
Right. So the data graph is, I suppose, your clearest like ring fence around your IP.
Yeah.
Stuff that's there you really don't want to be in the public domain.
Yeah.
Do you know how much it is in the public domain? What steps do you have to try and take to protect that? I guess some of it ends up on web pages, gets crawled, probably gets into the model.
So I think, dare I say, I think relatively. So when I think about what that landscape looks like, so our data graph itself is in a SaaS model. So the ontology we own, the technology that it sits on and runs that, is in a SaaS model. So that SaaS model has its, relevant, security and normal data considerations of protection you'd expect built into that. And there are AI connections, token based, so security around all the different layers that you could expect. So you wouldn't expect that to be open as a back-end tool that isn't open to the public. LLMs, we would expect when we're doing our own or using third parties that sharing our information with the public model is always checked and turned off. So that obviously remains then as part of we're bringing the brain, if you like, to our data type of argument. How actually real that is and the implications of it, I guess there's a lot of trust in the companies that...
How real those policies are, as in trust in the foundation model.
Yes, how strictly that's applied and how rigorously it's done and how much that comes under threat and attack going forward, I think is probably an area which, I'm sure there'll be lots of focus and concentration and energy going into by those companies. You would hope so. Yeah. Are they foolproof? I'm not so sure. Time will tell. But at the same stage, I think at this point, what option have you got? Right. You can do what you need to do. It's a risk probably worth taking within the context of the security and the mitigations you can put in place.
Yeah. Okay. I guess already about Cornwall Insight owned data, which is the provenance for something on traditional media. Like, I guess maybe there's a BBC News broadcast, and at some point there's a stat that they flash up and they attribute Cornwall Insight.
Yeah. That does happen quite a lot, actually, with our business, yeah.
Right. So once that's gone into the public domain through one of those channels, it's reasonable to assume that is then being sucked into these models.
Sure. But, they're relevant snapshots in that scenario. So it's never the full picture. They're used in terms of context of, of helping support a particular argument or point of view that's being put across. And in doing so, it's generally only a snapshot. So that bearing in mind, it's a marketplace that, has data flows going on all the time. Things change. Our models change quarterly at the very minimum. And it's not then just about as well the models and the data goes out. It's really about the interpretation of those. So, understanding the archive and the history of the information that we've got, gives you some context of potentially how things are painted going forward. And then having people with the expertise and understanding of the market, there's an art and science very often putting together a few of our models. There's a constant sort of saying, I guess, in most modeling marketplaces, which, not every model is going to be correct. In fact, most models aren't correct. It's more about how you interpret them. There's some sort of truth in or some degree of right they might be. So there's always a little bit of science as well as the art going in. So the full level of interpretation as to exactly what that information means and what it means to the individual sitting on their seat doing their job is, I think, the part that we play.
Right. So we're moving on a little bit naturally here to Cornwall Insight's product. I'm definitely hearing that up to date, moving picture is important as opposed to snapshots, which might be, inevitable that they're going to get out to some extent or another. Yeah. Also, we've talked a lot about depth, so it's unlikely that, one BBC article puts out all of the information on like even a sector.
Any domain.
Yeah. So they're going to be a tiny small subset. Yeah. Whereas if you're making a really large investment in some kind of land for some wind farm development or something like this,
indeed,
then you really want to make sure you've crossed the T's and dotted the I's.
These are very big investments over a long period of time. So right. The governance that anyone would go through making that in financial investment would include the due diligence that you would expect to find and we would support with in terms of our consultancy and our information.
So I have two questions. One is how do you try to stay ahead of the foundation models and making sure you are more relevant and you do have that deeper, more specialist knowledge? And secondly, and maybe this is the harder question, how do you convince the market that you have that edge in terms of detail?
Yeah, well, they're both good questions. So, look, this comes to a question which, it links to something that has become sort of quite a popular term, and certainly I get asked more and more around exec in the boardroom, which is about what are you protecting? What's your IP? What's your moat, if you like? And I tend to describe that these days as it's not one thing. It's not an LLM or AI on its own. It's a combination of things. And that combination really comes from having your data structured in the right way, which is completely AI readable, interpretable. And it comes from having a context-driven domain that it can reference and refer to so it can remain accurate and credible in the responses that it gives. And then it comes down to providing people access to information and the answers that they want at real pace, where AI has value there, where you even consider something like a chatbot and the level of interrogation that you can go into and the types of questions that you can ask that will get you to a much quicker, rounded answer. Now, if that's baked then in, 25 years of Cornwall Insight, understanding and meaning around what's happened in the marketplace, that is very, very hard to replicate. If you're sitting at your desk, independent business and might be buying our services, you're never going to have that depth, that context and that view over that many years. Right. It's that level of understanding of data. And then also have someone that you can speak to help you start to interpret information. So even if you spoke to a chatbot and then that, gave you a good level of understanding, there's probably still a level of confidence that you might want when you actually speak to a human about what isn't in the data. What's it not telling me? And there are, plenty of indications that, the data will only get you so far, but interpreting what that really means and in the context of the marketplace and what's really coming up, you can certainly need a wider view and a wider context and all of that.
Well, there's that, classic in everybody's experience of Claude, which is every now and again when it says something wrong and you say, no, that's wrong. And it goes, oh yeah, of course I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Here's the right answer. But that only works if you knew that it was wrong.
Yeah.
So, is that the kind of language, or all the things you talked about with accountability and having a human there to interpret it and making sure that it's reliable? Is that the language that you're using in the market? Is it resonating? Are there people who are pushing back and going, no, actually, I trust AI more?
We probably haven't got to that level yet. I think we're probably just still on that journey. So I would imagine like businesses that look a bit like ours, there's plenty of experimentation going on, lots of pilots most of those for us at the moment, and the pace that we're progressing, is mainly back office stuff, workflow stuff, process stuff.
Okay.
It's the easiest, safest space to play in.
Right.
You can move fastest, everyone feeling a bit more comfortable that there isn't the risk there. As soon as you start opening stuff up, obviously, to, customers, then at that point you want to be, very, very confident that you are providing actually models that are interpreting stuff the right way. So we're still going through the process of getting some of our data structured in the right way, linking up with our ontology and our graph, making sure that's informed the right way. We've got all the relevant reference data and understanding and context that it is delivering to the questions that are being asked of it, the type of level of quality with the veracity and the citing of all the information that we've got behind that to the same level that our analysts would expect it to. We're going through that process. So actually taking that to the marketplace yet, we've only got a beta version right now, which is clearly in beta as it's labelled. So within our subscription product,
your AI.
This is our AI are working. We've got that in beta right now, and there's continued development going on to improve that. I mean, it's happening quicker and quicker. So we'll surely come across more of those questions, I think, as we put more of this into the marketplace.
Yeah, I would like to double click on that in a second. Just before we leave so I'm thinking more about from the messaging point of view. Look, if this question is too personal for the company, too confidential, then feel free to skirt around it or not answer. But how much? I guess my question is, how much are you seeing your people in the field, your sales people, your inside sales reps, going closed, lost because AI was the competitor?
Oh, I see. So I get the impression at the moment that there are conversations going on, which would suggest that, that is in our customers' minds for a couple of our products at the moment. Okay. I would think. So we are aware that risk exists. How real it is and how much it's preventing deals happening, I'm not sure yet, but we're aware enough that we're understanding our products need to develop and change for the ones that are providing news and insight in particular to offer more value. And yes, the messaging will need to follow, which sort of says this is what we do and how we do it and why, which is different from what you might get if you're exploring your, researching yourself just using any of the tools that yourself. So we're working, we work towards more of that as we get better understanding.
Yeah, I mean, look, you mentioned moats before, and it's difficult for anybody at the moment to articulate moats as cleanly as you used to be able to, because things like software engineering has become far, far cheaper. So you can't really have a technical moat in the way that you used to be able to.
That's so true. We've got some really good examples actually as well. Some of our more creative and critical thinking employees, do not code, but are finding their ways around problems now using the tools we've already given them. That involves a lot of coding. But it then is improving the internal workflows and efficiency when I get into stuff.
Claude Code or something.
Claude and, some ChatGPT stuff initially, some trials on Copilot, some trials on Claude, same types of use cases being used across various tools to find out what works better and why. And that's, been a fairly fast and efficient thing to be able to get to. Lots of information sharing internally so people understand these things are going on. We have a Teams channel internally. Now that's obviously hooked up to Claude. Now that's hooked up to, to ChatGPT and to Copilot. We can ask many more questions than of our internal tooling, get things summarized and shared much more easily. So, there are more and more examples of people coming across a problem thinking, well, if I just ask this LLM to help me solve that, how well does it do it? And, there were plenty of use cases that we've got developing that's exactly happening.
And I guess that from a governance point of view, that loops back to people are getting creative and doing stuff. Are they leaking our data to OpenAI and Anthropic?
Well, again, in that scenario, they're using our tooling. So they're using the LLMs that we have provided internally to do that on. So they're licenses that we manage control centrally. And within that, obviously, we're controlling the fact that this information isn't going back into the public domain. So we're relying on the fact that that's not happening, because that is essentially the button that we press to ensure that it doesn't.
So you give them the tools before they need it, so that at the point they're going to go and do something, they're not going and doing any discovery on their own.
Yeah, look, I can't rule out that, people aren't doing some of their own discovery for sure. But as a whole, that's what the PEI Group is all about internally. All of the people in PEI Group have got the tools, and their job really is to start to use them, experiment with them in a safe place, in order to work out what's working and not. And then what they're doing is putting use cases together, writing up almost runbook-esque the type of things they did and how to their colleagues to apply it. So we can roll out those licenses then to the next person who can take on exactly the same type of use case and get the same type of benefit. As we see that happening, and we should start to see that happening at pace now, I think. As we see that happening, the idea is then actually how now do we take stuff from a individual application in these scenarios to understanding that there's a workflow that actually applies where there's real value across the board. So I want to now put that more to an architectural level. This should now be promoted to a level where those fonts, those backgrounds, the context and understanding actually is embedded then within our workflows. That's for me the big change from having people experimenting and piloting to going to something which is more enterprise, is actually embedding stuff in a workflow at sort of an enterprise level.
So just going back to moats for a second, it sounds to me like the fundamental moat that Cornwall Insight has is knowledge and experience of how to use it, data and experience of how to use it. So if you try to roll forward how this technology is going to look in some years' time in the future, I guess there's a school of thought that says much of the web is actually probably a legacy way of interacting with things, right? You could imagine that if you want to buy something on Amazon, you're not going to be going onto the Amazon website and searching for all the rest. You're going to be asking your assistant, your AI assistant, hey, buy this thing for me. And it maybe gives you a bit of feedback, maybe not.
Yeah, agreed.
So likewise, when somebody is looking to make this big investment in an energy project and they need consulting information or access to data that Cornwall Insight hold, could you see a future where the gateway to that is entirely through a chatbot? And what risks would you see with that B2B relationship with yourselves and the foundation models?
So, look, in terms of vision, my technology stack and the vision of where we are heading as a business, I think we have a view that we could see us serving our domain model to people. And what that would be doing in a context where they want to have the right, they've got some questions of their domain. They are subscribed to our information and data, which currently they'd get via newsletters and APIs and our web interface and our UIs. I definitely see a place where like to a certain extent, APIs have been a common delivery channel now for a long time for information businesses. I've been around long enough to remember when they first came around, and it's a big change for a business in terms of how you sell and market as well, that in terms of context. So I think there'll have to be some experience to go through for a business to start to pick up on what an MCCP service really is and how people interact with it and where the value is, and then how we actually charge for that, given the underlying charging models and structures you're taking on. So there's a bit of a change for a business to take on to think about this. But absolutely, I imagine a scenario where someone's sitting at their desk and they have a license to our content in a particular domain, and they'll be using their chatbot to interact with our domain to ask questions of. That way they always know they're getting the contextually relevant answers from an independent source who have already provided into that information, a human governed view of what's happening in that marketplace. So hopefully a lot more sense of security and confidence and trust that information actually is going to be more accurate and reliable than actually if they were just doing their own search on LLMs in the wider marketplace themselves.
So I remember, and you I'm sure will as well, in the media industry, there was a lot of worry and some maybe arguments for and against around the Google AMP project, accelerated mobile pages. So this was a way of getting primarily news content onto people's phones when it was low bandwidth. And what a lot of the critics of that project pointed out was it was increasingly moving the channel that a publisher uses into Google. So these AMP pages didn't look quite like your website. They weren't hosted on your, but maybe they were partially hosted on your backend, partially hosted on Google's backend. You lost a bit of control. And the concern was like, look, Google already owns the monetization because 90% of the ads are running through Google. They already own the traffic because 90% of the traffic is coming from search. They're increasingly trying to own the channel that you're publishing on, so AMP and whatnot. In the end, there's going to be nothing stopping them disintermediating the publisher and just doing their own thing. I could see a lot of similarities between that and what might happen if everybody's pumping all their content out via MCP servers, so they don't own the channel, they don't own the monetization potentially. Something on your mind?
Well, look, so the license of that and the IP control is obviously key to that. So that needs to be managed. I mean, to go back to the point you made about AMP, I mean, look, I guess, and there are, as you rightly say, clear lessons to be learned, because in the end, I think most publishers wandered, into a scenario where it was a race to the bottom, and essentially giving everything away to Google. And over the years now, giving everything away to AI. And we can see deals that are now going on to address that to a certain extent, where media owners are entering relationships from an AI perspective with tech organizations.
A position of power.
They're not, and they're not doing it in a joined up way. It's individual deals going on. So I think that risk is real. And I think it needs to be identified and recognised. I would like to think that in a domain like ours, which is fairly niche, which has to have the context and understanding and history in order to give you a more accurate, critical, trusted view of actually what's going on, alongside a human interpretation of what's happening in that marketplace as well. The level of decision making that is going on for our customers, I think that level of confidence is probably still necessary. So I would imagine that we would get all of our, when you subscribe to our information in the future, I'd imagine you get yourself into a situation where you can easily start to ask questions of it and get a really quite a fundamental good understanding of what's happening and why. But I'm pretty sure that there's still a level then of nuance over and above that you want the confidence on to be responded to, which, involves something which might be difficult to actually get out of any L&M model. And you're still going to need some human interpretation of what, why, and how it's going to affect the marketplace.
Okay, very good. So we've probably talked for a bit longer than I intended to.
Okay.
I tell you what, I'd like to wrap up with one final question, which I think really builds upon what you were just saying, which is AI is somewhere on a maturity curve at the moment. Right? And this is a big question that I think drives a lot of people's anxiety with how we're going to live with AI in the future. So on the one hand, maybe it's in a very immature state, and in a couple of years, it's going to be like so tremendously powerful that it will absolutely transform the way we live our lives in every aspect. Some very good ways, some potentially damaging ways. Or maybe actually the technology, at least in its current guise, has kind of run its course. It's going to be very small incremental improvements and people building on top of it. And we're just getting used to it now. Where do you feel we are on that spectrum?
So look, I guess I've been around long enough to have some sort of comparison to even when the web first came around, right? So I'm old enough to go back to the original days of Sky when we had the first digital function within Sky, which was so old we had Channel 5 teletext within that digital function at that stage, right through to Yahoo, where it felt like at Yahoo for a few years I went through the boom and bust of the .com era with Yahoo, and it felt like for a long time we were riding the quest of the the crest of the new technology age, and then into mobile. And, for a long time, mobile felt like it was being talked about as the second coming, and it never quite seemed to come at the same pace as all the hype was talking about. It seems to take a while to get there, right? But you look back at all of those things, however long that they took, and probably each one has probably been quicker than the next, and how much it's changed our lives now. So the phone's probably the latest thing, as you rightly say, the good and bad. Well, phones have been amazing for lots of good reasons in people's lives, but at the same stage, it's new to everyone, and how we manage screen time ourselves and our kids and the way apps are built and the addictive nature of them and the psychology that goes into them.
Yeah.
It's all new to us, and we're all developing skills and strategies of how we should develop that, and we can see some of the harm that it's causing. So I've no doubt that the journey we're on with AI has all of those challenges built into it.
Yeah.
I think what I can see with AI, though, is a couple of things. One is it is the fastest moving so far. We can see it with the take-up. So look at any of the models. I think they're the fastest growing businesses on the planet going up. So that gives you an indication. You look at individuals' experiences, and it's hard to ignore. My wife's probably a good example where she's a bit of a technophobe. She's not a great fan of technology in general, but, AI for her has become almost a bit like a counselling resource, at home these days, and has really helped her consolidate some of her thoughts and challenges that go on even on a day-to-day basis.
Which interestingly shows that the core user experience of a language-based model is actually more friendly and more human than telling somebody to go and learn how to use a website.
Yeah, it really is, actually. So it's, I think, the intuitive nature of how you interact with it being NLP and how much better it's getting at talking and responding to you.
Yeah.
And even how much better it's getting at prompting you as well and asking you questions you go. And I've noticed that with Claude and Coworker, when it actually asks you questions, so it improves its own prompting. So all of that stuff is continuing to improve, but I think they are relatively subtle improvements on the LLM. I think the next big thing that we're already starting to see is agents, and Coworker is a good example of that. It's then you've got the ability to ask some quite significant detailed questions and get really good insight from essentially something which is the smartest person on the planet right next to you in terms of information. But it's then how do you apply that in an effective way? And I think agents now are the next wave of actually putting all of this into a place where it becomes really practical in terms of how you ask it to do things for you, and then building a level of trust and confidence that it can go off and do those and you can rely on it.
Well, okay. There's a few things to unpack there.
That means we're going on for longer.
We're going on for longer, I'm afraid. First thing that I'd like to double click on there is, so you talked about mobile and social media and these kind of previous technology waves. My observation would be that once they were invented, the fundamental technology didn't change that much. Right? When the web was invented, it was pretty much in its final state. We got better at doing things with it over time, but these were small iterative improvements.
On the core technology, you mean? On
the core technology. Actually, the thing that took a very long time to catch up, and you would put a pretty strong argument together to say we still haven't quite caught up, was how society works with that technology. So the addictive nature of social media and apps and stuff like this. And so I suppose it would be potentially the same thing with these AI models. So you talked about how Claude prompts you and your wife to continue prompting it. Again, Claude makes its money based upon the number of tokens that it sends back to you. And quite often its follow-up questions are, let's talk about the next thing. Let's go a little bit deeper, right? Is Claude doing that to improve its service, or is Claude doing that to improve Anthropic's revenue? How do you, is your prediction that the technology is done and society is going to catch up? Or actually, the technology isn't even done yet, so we can't start adjusting society to how these things are going to work?
Some good questions there on there. So I think that I don't think the technology is done, and I think that we all can see as the latest iterations of LLMs come along, and as they are developing bits of their model outperforming the last bits of those models all the time, you're getting slightly better outputs. So an experience of that we've had internally is, for the first time just recently, I think, we have a level of confidence that our Claude Coworker could go as far as interpreting one of our finance board slides and outputting into the output that board slide needs to be put into something which is pretty much acceptable to put into a pack. Now, before using the latest version of Claude, I think we had a combination. I think Claude Sonnet was certainly one of the LLMs that we used. I have to double check, but I used that in the finance team. But with that, it was the co-pilot part of that, the agent part of that, which was using the relevant access and to documents and to information that existed in various places, bringing that together, understanding the equation that needed to be run in order to and interpret all of the language and the different vocabulary that goes around finance language, and interpreting those figures to a point that it gave us an output where, one, that was right, and then two, it could put that output into a context and a presentation which was also fed into the model, and how it could do that. So while some of those queries were added up and you could see the counter going up, it's doing those queries. It gives you all a view of as it's doing them, what it's doing and how it's doing it, and why it's doing it, which is extraordinarily useful. But that was the first time we got an output like that. So there was a model improvement in order for it to go through that sequence of events and give us a quality output at that point that we could use in earnest, to a point now where we're experimenting, doing, why not do all of the slides? We've had a whole business where we produce quite a lot of different PPTs and reports. It's the nature of consultancy very often that it's the end product that often people want. And the idea of getting to a place where we can turn those out more effectively and more efficiently, always with that human input in the end, but getting that information together, interrogating different systems, bringing all that back in workflows which are controlled and understood, and then developing us an output which gets us a long way to the answers that we want, is probably a part of the efficiency that we're looking to gain and to get to. But I think there are absolutely updates and changes in models which show you the technology is continuing to improve. Now, in terms of the general cost and how that adapts, look, these companies are already making, lots of money, and, clearly there's opportunity to do that. There's some, I guess, reliance that you think, well, in order for them to win their own races in their own marketplaces, it's not necessarily going to be even in their best interest to charge unnecessarily for their tokens and the way that it operates. So you can see that going to be adapting over time. You can understand that, if you're asking simple research-esque questions of it and it's responding to you in text and sticking stuff in PowerPoint, well, that probably isn't its biggest, energy user. It isn't its biggest cost impact. So you can imagine it engaging more and more people by continuing to make that as cheap and as cost effective as possible. I think where it will gain more and more is the volume of usage that it's got across that, and then probably more and more the complex queries that it ends up running. And as people get used to running even the simple stuff that gives them value, it will automatically lead them on to running the more complex stuff. So I think when there are agents involved and they're doing different things and they're going into different areas and they're going through multiple steps to help them decide what information that you want and putting that into action. So whether it's paying for something for you, I think all of those things, will probably end up being modelled in a way which allows you to sort of understand what a £20-25 investment on a license might give you on a monthly basis. So it'll be interesting to see how they do develop their commercial model, but I think there's plenty of scope for it to be cost effective, efficient at the right levels.
And roughly speaking, to summarize that, your prediction is as the models get more powerful, there's just an inevitable slide to more and more stuff being handed off to agents.
Yeah, it'll be a volume thing. Yeah, there'll be more and more. It will be so easy to do. That I think that people will become very reliant on it in the same way now that most people don't leave home without their phones. I don't think you'll be doing very much work on your desktop anymore or your phone without an agent actually interpreting that and doing it for you.
And impact then on workforce and employment numbers?
That is the really big question, isn't it? I mean, look, at CI, at the moment, Cornwall Insight, that is, we feel the human in loop is really important. It's imperative to what we do. We'll get more efficient, no doubt, at the way we bring information together. We'll get more efficient at, how we manage our day-to-day with all the workflow improvements that we just imagine we're working on, we're talking about. But I think we'll still need that, that creative eye and that, that critical thinking of a human in a loop. So, we just think that we're going to put people onto, higher value tasks within our business. We'll do more of the higher value stuff, deliver more value to our clients all the time off the back of that. And that's what our, people will be put to work with. I've seen models, I've been in, presentations around AI and, you see these models and this, prediction that potentially there might be million to multi-million pound businesses being run with, one or two people and just a load of AI agents. It's not impossible to view in the right context, in the right type of business. You could absolutely see that, there's a workforce of AI agents. I don't think that is I think that's probably somewhere in our future, but I don't think it's an impossible place to get to. I don't think it'll apply across the board.
Okay. All right. That's great. I could go on for a lot longer, but I'm going to have to be disciplined and say thank you very much, Tony. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure, Chris. Always good to talk to you.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thanks, mate.